So, hello and welcome back to Ivanhoe, where I feel like last chapter we got a lot of forward momentum, not huge amounts, but we did get a decent amount of forward momentum in the story. I mean, we didn't get to see what's going on with Ivanhoe, who was left grievously wounded in the chapter before, but we did get to see who I am betting is our Robin Hood. I mean, obviously, Loxley, um, doing the famous arrow splitting scene, which is kind of cool. And, we did also hear that King Richard is back. So that's definitely going to drive the plot forward as the evil Prince John tries to secure his throne. He also seems to have kind of given away Rowena. I I'm so glad I didn't live back then. The thought of anyone being like, "Oh yes, I don't even know this woman, but you may marry her." You? No, thank you. Sounds terrible. I mean, I'm sure we're going to subvert that expectation somehow. I seems to be Rowena and Ivanhoe as a couple, but we shall see. Things could shake out differently, although I feel like most of these tropes that are associated with the whole Robin Hood and medieval knights thing probably came from this book, but we have a lot of book left to go. So we're just going to have to wait and see how it all shakes out. And we have a quote at the beginning of the next one that I'm sure will be obscure as heck to me again, but we're going to go for it. So the quote at the beginning of chapter 14 is from Wharton. Don't know who that is. In rough magnificence arrayed, when ancient chivalry displayed the pomp of her heroic games, and crested chiefs and tissued dames assembled at the clarion's call in some proud castle's high arched wall. And that was Wharton. That one actually made sense. Anyway, we are going to be jumping back in and reading chapter 14 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Prince John held his high festival in the castle of Ashby. This was not the same building of which the stately ruins still interest the traveler, and which was erected at a later period by the Lord Hastings, High Chamberlain of England, one of the first victims of the tyranny of Richard III, and yet better known as one of Shakespeare's characters than by his own historical fame. The castle and town of Ashby at this time belonged to Roger de Quincey, Earl of Winchester, who during the period of our history was absent in the Holy Land. Prince John, in the meanwhile, occupied his castle and disposed of his domains without scruple, and seeking at present to dazzle men's eyes by his hospitality and magnificence, had given orders for great preparations in order to render the banquet as splendid as he possibly could. The purveyors of the prince, who exercised on this and other occasions the full authority of royalty, had swept the country of all that could be collected and which was esteemed fit for their master's table. Guests, who were also invited in great numbers, and in the necessity in which he had then found himself of courting popularity, Prince John had extended his invitation to a few distinguished Saxon and Danish families, as well as to the Norman nobility and the gentry of the local neighborhood. However despised and however degraded on ordinary occasions, the great numbers of the Anglo-Saxons must necessarily render them formidable in the civil commendations which seemed approaching, and it was an obvious point of policy to secure popularity, at least with their leaders. It was accordingly the prince's intention, which he for some time maintained, to treat these unwanted guests with a courtesy to which they had rarely been accustomed to. But although no man with less scruple made his ordinary habits and feelings bend to his interest, it was the misfortune of this prince that his levity and petulance were perpetually breaking out and undoing all that had been gained by his previous dissimulation. Of this fickle temper he gave memorable example in Ireland, when sent thither by his father Henry II with the purpose of buying golden opinions of the inhabitants of that new and very important acquisition to the British crown. Upon this occasion, the Irish chieftains contended which should first offer the young prince their loyal homage and the kiss of peace, but instead of receiving their salutations with courtesy, John and his petulant attendants could not resist the temptation of pulling the long beards of the Irish chieftains, a conduct which, as might have been expected, was highly resented by these insulted dignitaries, and produced fatal consequences to the English domination in Ireland. It is necessary to keep these inconsistencies of John's character in clear view so that the reader may understand his conduct during this present evening. In execution of the resolution which he had formed during his cooler moments, Prince John received Cedric and Athelstine with distinguished courtesy, and he expressed his disappointment without resentment when the indisposition of Rowena was alleged by the former as a reason for her not attending this gracious summons. Cedric and Athelstine were both dressed in the ancient Saxon garb, which, although not unhandsome in itself, and in the present instance composed of costly materials, was so remote in shape and appearance from that of the other guests that Prince John took great credit to himself with Vladimir Fitzruse for not laughing at the sight of which fashion the day rendered ridiculous. Yet, in the eye of somber judgment, the short close tunic and long mantle of the Saxons was a more graceful as well as a more convenient dress than the garb of the Normans, whose undergarment was a long doublet, so loose as to resemble a shirt or a wagoner's frock, covered by a cloak of scanty dimensions, neither fit to defend the wearer from cold or rain, and the only purpose of which appeared to be displaying as much fur embroidery and jewels as the tailor could contrive to put upon it. The Emperor Charlemagne, in whose reign they were first introduced, seems to have been very sensible of the inconveniences arising from fashion of this garment. In heaven's name, he had said, to what purpose serve these abridged cloaks? If we are in bed, they are no cover. On horseback, they are no protection from the wind and rain. And when seated, they do not guard our legs from damp or frost. Nevertheless, in spite of imperial objection, these short cloaks continued in fashion down from the time of which we speak, and particularly among the princes of the house of Anjou. They were therefore in universal use among Prince John's courtiers, and the long mantle, which formed the upper garment of the Saxon, was held in proportional derision. The guests were seated at a table which groaned under the quantity of good cheer and food. The numerous cooks who attended on the prince's progress, having exerted all of their art in varying the forms in which the ordinary provisions had been served, had succeeded almost as well as the modern professors of the culinary art in rendering them perfectly unlike their natural appearances. Besides these dishes of domestic origin, there were various delicacies brought in from foreign parts, and a quantity of rich pastry, as well as of the semel bread and wastel cakes, which were only used at the tables of the highest nobility. The banquet was crowned with the richest wines, both foreign and domestic. But though luxurious, the Norman nobles were not, generally speaking, an intemperate race. While indulging themselves in the pleasure of the table, they aimed at delicacy but avoided excess, and were apt to attribute gluttony and drunkenness to the vanquished Saxons, as well as vices peculiar to their inferior station. Prince John, indeed, and those who courted his pleasure by imitating his foibles, were apt to indulge to excess in the pleasures of the trencher and the goblet, and indeed it is well known that his death was occasioned by far too many new peaches and ale. His conduct, however, was an exception to the general manners of his countrymen. With sly gravity, interrupted only by private signs to each other, the Norman knights and nobles beheld the ruder demeanor of Athelstine and Cedric at a banquet, to the form and faction of which they were not accustomed at all. And while their manners were thus the subject of sarcastic observation, the untaught Saxons unwittingly transgressed several of the arbitrary rules established for the regulation of society. Now, it is well known that a man may with more impunity be guilty of an actual breach either of real good breeding or good morals than appear ignorant of the most minute point of fashionable etiquette. Thus Cedric, who dried his hands with a towel instead of suffering the moisture to exhale by waving them in the air, incurred more ridicule than his companion Athelstine when he swallowed to his own single share the whole of a large pastry composed of the most exquisite foreign delicacies, and termed at that time to be a carum pie. When, however, it was discovered by a serious cross-examination that the Thane of Coinsborough, or Franklin as the Normans called him, had no idea what he had been devouring, and that he had taken the contents of the carum pie for larks and pigeons, whereas they were in fact beneficiados and nightingales, his ignorance brought for him an ample share of the ridicule which would have been more justly bestowed upon him being a glutton. The long feast had at length its end, and while the goblets circulated freely, men talked of the feats of the preceding tournament, of the unknown victor in the archery games, of the Black Knight whose self-denial had induced him to withdraw from the honors he had won, and of the gallant Ivanhoe, who had so dearly bought the honors of the day. The topics were treated with a military frankness, and the jests and laughs went round the hall. The brow of Prince John alone was overclouded during these discussions. Some overpowering care seemed agitating his mind, and it was only when he received occasional hints from his attendants that he seemed to take any interest in what was going on around him. On such occasions, he would start up, quaff a cup of wine as if to raise his spirits, and then mingle in the conversation by some observation made quickly or at random. "We drink this beaker," he said, "to the health of Wilfred of Ivanhoe, champion of this passage of arms, and grieve that his wound renders him absent from our meal. Let all fill to this pledge, and especially Cedric of Rotherwood, the worthy father of a son so promising." "No, my lord," said Cedric, standing up and placing on the table his untasted cup. "I yield not the name of son to the disobedient youth who at once despises my commands and relinquishes the manners and custom of his forefathers." "That's impossible," cried Prince John, with well-feigned astonishment, "that so gallant a knight should be an unworthy or disobedient child." "Yes, my lord," said Cedric. "So it is with this Wilfred. He left my home to mingle with the gay nobility of your brother's court, where he learned to do those tricks of horsemanship that you prize so highly. He left it contrary to my wishes and commands, and in the days of Alfred, that would have been termed disobedience. Aye, a crime severely punishable. Oh, tragedy, said Prince John, with a deep sigh of affected sympathy. Since your son was a follower of my unhappy brother, it need not be inquired where or from whom he learned the lesson of filial disobedience. Thus spoke Prince John, wilfully forgetting that of all the sons of Henry II, though not one was free from the charge, he himself had been most distinguished for rebellion and ingratitude to his sire. I think, said Prince John after a moment's pause, that my brother proposed to confer upon his favorite the rich manor of Ivanhoe. He did. He endowed him with it, said Cedric. Nor is it my least quarrel with my son that he stooped to hold as a feudal vassal the very domains which his fathers possessed in free and independent right. We shall then have your willing sanction, good Cedric, said Prince John, to confer this fief upon a person whose dignity will not be diminished by holding land of the Brits' crown. Sir Reginald de Fondeboeuf, he said, turning towards that baron, I trust you will so keep the goodly barony of Ivanhoe that Sir Wilfrid will not incur his father's farther displeasure by again entering and attempting to own that fief. By St. Anthony, said the black-haired giant, I will consent that your highness shall hold me a Saxon, if either Cedric or Wilfrid, or the best that ever bore English blood, shall wrench from me the gift which your highness has just given me. Whoever shall call thee Saxon, Sir Baron, said Cedric, offended at a mode of expression by which the Normans frequently express their habitual contempt of the English, will do thee an honor, as great as it is undeserved. Fondeboeuf would have said something, but Prince John's petulance and levity got the start. Assuredly, said he, my lords, the noble Cedric speaks the truth, and his race may claim precedence over us as much in the length of their pedigrees as in the longitude of their cloaks. They go before us indeed in the field, like deer before dogs, said Malvision. And with a good right they may go before us, forget not, said Prior Aymer, the superior decency and decorum of their manners. Their singular absentimus, I don't know that word, and temperance, said De Bracy, forgetting the plan which promised him a Saxon bride. Together with the courage and conduct, said Brian de Bois Guilbert, by which they have distinguished themselves at Hastings and other places. Well, with smooth and smiling faces, the courtiers, each in turn, followed their prince's example and aimed a shaft of ridicule at Cedric, the face of the said Saxon swiftly becoming inflamed with passion. Cedric glanced his eyes fiercely from one man to the other, as if the quick succession of so many injuries had prevented him from replying to them in turn, or perhaps like a baited bull, who, surrounded by tormentors, is at a loss to choose from among them who he should charge. At length Cedric spoke, in a voice half choked with passion, and, addressing himself to Prince John as the head and front of the offense which he had just received. Whatever, he said, whatever have been the follies and vices of our race, a Saxton would have been held niddering, the most emphatic term for being worthless, who should in his own hall, and well his own wine cup past, have treated, suffered, or suffered to be treated, an unoffending guest the way your highness this day has beheld me used. And whatever the misfortune of our fathers on the field of Hastings, those may at least be silent. Here Cedric looked at Front de Boeuf and at the Templar, who have within these few hours once again and again lost saddle and stirrup before the lance of a Saxton. Oh, by my faith, a biting jest, said Prince John. How do you like it, my friends? Our Saxon subjects rise in spirit and courage, become shrewd in wit and bold in bearing in these unsettled times. What say ye, my lords? By this good light, I hold it best to take our galleys and return home to Normandy. For fear of the Saxons, said De Bracy with a laugh. We should need no weapon but our hunting spears to bring these boars to bay. A truce with your jokes, Sir Knight, said Fitzruse. And it were well, he said, turning to the prince, that your highness should assure the worthy Cedric that there is no insult intended on him by jests which must sound but harshly in the ears of a stranger. Insult, said Prince John, resuming his courtesy of demeanor. I trust it will not be thought that I could mean to or permit anyone to be offended in my presence. Here, I fill my cup to Cedric himself, since he refuses to pledge his son's health. The cup went round, amid the well-dissembled applause of the courtiers, which, however, failed to make the impression on the mind of the Saxton that had been intended. He was not actually acute of perception, but those too much undervalued his understanding who deemed that this flattering compliment would obliterate his sense of being insulted. Cedric was silent, however, when the royal pledge again passed round. To Sir Athelstine of Coinsborough. That knight made his bow and showed his sense of honor by draining the huge goblet in answer to the praise. And now, sirs, said Prince John, who began to be warmed by the wine he had drunk, having done justice to our Saxon guests, we will pray of them some requital to this courtesy. Worthy Thane, he said, addressing Cedric, we may pray you to name us some Norman, whose mention is the least sullied in your mouth, and to wash down with a goblet of wine all bitterness which the sound might leave behind in it. Fitzruse rose while Prince John spoke, and gliding behind the seat of the Saxton, whispered to him not to omit the opportunity of putting an end to the unkindness that was between the two races by naming Prince John. Cedric replied not to this polite thought, but rising up and filling his cup to the brim, he addressed Prince John and said, Your Highness has required that I should name some Norman deserving to be remembered at our banquet. This perhaps a hard task, since it calls on the slave to sing the praises of a master, upon the vanquished, well pressed by all the evils of conquest, to sing the praises of the conqueror. Yet I will name a Norman, the first in arms and in place, the best and noblest of his race, and the lips that shall refuse to pledge me to his well-earned fame, I will term false and dishonored, and will so maintain them with my own life. I drink this goblet to the health of Richard the Lion-Hearted. Prince John, who had expected that his own name would have closed the Saxton's speech, stared when that of his injured brother was so unexpectedly introduced. He raised mechanically the wine cup to his lips and then instantly set it down to view the demeanor of the company at this unexpected proposal, which many of them felt it as unsafe to oppose as comply with. Some of them, ancient and experienced courtiers, closely imitated the example of the prince himself, raising the goblet to their lips and replacing it in front of them. There were many who, with a more generous feeling, exclaimed, "Long live King Richard, and may he be speedily restored to us." And some few, amongst whom were Front de Boeuf and the Templar, sat in sullen disdain, suffering their goblets to stand without even tasting them. But no man ventured directly to gainsay a pledge filled to the health of the reigning king. Having enjoyed his triumph for about a minute, Cedric then turned to his companion. "Up, noble Athelstine! We have remained here long enough, since we have requited the hospitable courtesy of Prince John's banquet. Those who wish to know further about our rude Saxon manners must from now on seek us in the homes of our fathers, since we've seen enough of the royal banquets, and more than enough of Norman courtesy." Saying that, he arose and left the banqueting room, followed by Athelstine and several other guests, who, partaking of the Saxon lineage, held themselves insulted by the sarcasm of Prince John and his courtiers. "By the bones of St. Thomas," said Prince John as they left, "the Saxon churls have borne off the best of the day, and they retreat with triumph." "Consolatum est proculatum est," said Prior Aymer. "We have drunk and we have shouted. It were time we left our wine flagons." "The monk is got some fair penitent to shrive tonight. He must, that he is in such a hurry to leave the banquet," said De Bracy. "Not so, Sir Knight," said the abbot, "but I must move several miles forward this evening upon my homeward journey." "They're breaking up," said the prince, whispering to Fitzruse. "Their fears anticipate the event, and this coward prior is the first one to pull back from me." "Fear not, my lord," said Watermere. "I will show him such reasons as shall induce him to join us when we hold our meeting at York. Sir Prior," he said, "I must speak to you in private before you mount your palfrey." The other guests were now fast departing, with the exception of those immediately attached to Prince John's faction and retinue. "This is, then, the result of your advice?" said the prince, turning an angry face upon Fitzruse. "That I should be bearded at my own board by a drunken Saxon churl, and that, on the mere sound of my brother's name, men should fall away from me, as if I were a leper?" "Patience, sir," replied his counselor. "I might retort your accusation, and blame the inconsiderate levity which foiled my design and misled your own better judgment, but this is no time for recrimination. De Bracy and I will instantly go among these shuffling cowards and convince them that they've gone too far to leave." "It'll be in vain," said Prince John, pacing the apartment, and expressing himself with an agitation to which the wine he had drunk partly contributed. "It will be in vain. They've seen the handwriting on the wall. They've marked the paw of the lion in the sand. They've heard his approaching roar shake the woods. Nothing will reanimate their courage." "Would to God," said Fitzruse, "that anyone could reanimate his own. His brother's very name is an ague upon him. Unhappy are the counsellors of a prince who wants fortitude and perseverance alike in both good and evil." And that is the end of chapter 14. Interesting. I feel like some of the insults probably don't translate as well in Old English to modern English as they could. Again, I kind of would like to see this reimagined in a more modern setting, or at least with modern updated English. And it might actually exist, it just would not be public domain. But it is interesting seeing where it all started. The political intrigue, some of it goes over my head, but some of it's kind of really fun. So I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am, and I will see you tomorrow.